Hello, dear viewers, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we bring you another deeply moving and powerful story that reminds us of the strength of kindness and the courage to see beyond appearances. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that could inspire or change the way you see the world. Now, let's dive into the story. Linda Monroe, a woman in her mid-50s, was known as the most difficult landlord on Maple Avenue, Illinois. Her silver hair was always neatly tied in a bun, her pale blue dress ironed to perfection, and her voice sharp as a razor blade. For Linda, everything had to be orderly and clean. She saw herself as the guardian of standards in this peaceful and safe neighborhood. Her two-story colonial-style home sat nestled in a quiet street, painted in warm beige with pristine white fences. The downstairs unit had been converted into a small apartment for rent, a side income to maintain her standard lifestyle. But no tenant ever stayed long. Within a few months, they'd always leave, unable to tolerate her scrutiny and endless rules. That day, the soft April sunlight warmed the porch as Linda opened her front door, a cup of Earl Grey in hand. She noticed two young people standing by the gate. A tall young man with a gentle smile, holding the hand of a girl with curly hazelnut hair. Both seemed shy, dressed plainly but neatly. Daniel Hayes and Sophie Brooks, both living with Down syndrome, had come to inquire about the downstairs apartment. Daniel spoke politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Daniel, and this is my girlfriend, Sophie. We heard you have an apartment for rent." Linda paused. She stared at Daniel's face, then glanced at Sophie. Tension flickered in her eyes, though she forced a tight smile. "Oh, yes, there's an apartment." But her eyes darted down to their simple clothes, betraying her disapproval. "I'm not sure it would be suitable for you two." Before Daniel could respond, Sophie gently asked, "Could we at least take a look? We both have jobs and can pay rent on time." Linda hesitated. Then she gave a dismissive smile. "To be honest, I don't think so. I need tenants who know how to maintain order. I've had too much trouble in the past." Daniel replied calmly. "I work in a warehouse, and Sophie works part-time at a bakery. We always keep things tidy and quiet." Linda shook her head slightly before stating firmly, "I'm sorry. I think it's best if you look elsewhere. This neighborhood isn't really suited for people who require special care." Sophie squeezed Daniel's hand tightly. She held back tears, but Daniel simply bowed his head and said, "Thank you for your time, ma'am." They turned and walked away. Linda watched them go, shaking her head with self-satisfaction. She sighed, "These days, everyone thinks they can live like ordinary folks, even those with disabilities." Her voice wasn't quiet enough. Sophie heard every word. Later that afternoon, Linda visited the local grocery store and retold the story to her neighbor Janice. "Good thing I stayed sharp. Imagine if I let them live here. What if something went wrong? I always have to think about the neighborhood." Janice, unsure how to respond, just nodded. Some who overheard the story even murmured their agreement. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People began whispering about the Down syndrome couple wanting to rent, mixing fake pity with subtle disdain. That evening, when Walter Monroe, Linda's husband, returned home from his job at Innovatech, a local tech firm, he found his wife sipping red wine, her face glowing with pride. "What's got you looking so smug?" he asked. Linda recounted the day's events, adding some embellishments. Walter just shrugged. "As long as it's legal, do what you want. I did the right thing. I don't want chaos in my house," Linda replied, unaware that her actions that morning would change their lives forever. Elsewhere, in a small, musty room kindly offered by Mrs. Alma Franklin, a generous elderly lady from the neighboring block, Daniel and Sophie were quietly unpacking. Sophie hadn't said a word all evening, while Daniel kept his lips pressed tight. The room was tiny, damp, with only one small window facing a brick wall. Yet they tried to arrange things neatly, as if it were a real home. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked softly. Sophie nodded, but tears had already begun to fall. Daniel pulled her into a gentle hug. "We don't need them. One day, they'll know who we really are." Sophie held his hand tightly. In her eyes, there was no longer just pain, but a quiet hope, like a flame refusing to die out in the dark. On Monday morning, the sun had barely risen when Daniel got up. The small, cramped room he and Sophie rented from kind-hearted Mrs. Alma Franklin lacked comfort, but it was clean and quiet. Daniel carefully got out of bed so as not to wake Sophie. He put on his worn-out work jacket, checked his scuffed shoes, and picked up the canvas bag next to the door. Sophie stirred as he was about to leave. "Are you going to work?" Daniel nodded with a gentle smile. "Yeah, you can sleep a bit more. I'll stop by the bakery and bring your favorite cinnamon rolls." Sophie nodded. Although she still felt hurt by the rejection from Mrs. Linda, she didn't want to make Daniel feel worse. When Daniel arrived at the warehouse where he worked, a few co-workers were already gossiping. One of them, Joe, a young new hire, snickered and said loudly, "Did you hear about the Down syndrome couple who got turned away from a house on Maple Avenue? Seriously, what were they thinking?" Marcia, the middle-aged floor supervisor, frowned at Joe. "Watch your mouth. Daniel is one of the most hard-working people here." But the chuckles continued behind Daniel's back as he silently lifted crate after crate. He said nothing, focusing entirely on his job. Sweat trickled down his forehead, mingling with the quiet humiliation he refused to show. Meanwhile, Sophie was cleaning the counters at the Sweet Corner Bakery where she worked part-time. She helped prepare pastries, clean the floors, and pack takeout boxes. The owner, Mrs. Ellen, was one of the few people in the area willing to hire someone with Down syndrome and had patiently taught Sophie everything step by step. Not every customer was kind, though. A woman in a red blazer walked in, saw Sophie at the counter, and frowned. "Get someone else to help me. I'm not in the mood to be part of a charity act." Sophie quietly lowered her head and handed the order to her co-worker. Mrs. Ellen quickly stepped in and responded, "Everyone here is treated equally. If that bothers you, you're welcome to shop elsewhere." The woman blushed and stormed out without another word. Sophie almost cried, but held it in. Mrs. Ellen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great, Sophie. Don't let people like that make you feel small." But the story of the Down couple rejected from a rental didn't end there. Neighbors on Maple Avenue spread the word, and it eventually reached local Facebook groups. An anonymous account posted, "Mrs. Linda did the right thing. It's our duty to keep the neighborhood safe." Linda Monroe saw the post and smiled with smug satisfaction. She shared it with the caption, "Standards must be upheld. Don't sacrifice safety for sentiment." The story became controversial. Some people agreed, but others began to question it. At a community meeting, a middle school teacher named Rachel, whose younger brother had Down syndrome, stood up and asked, "We teach our kids about compassion and equality, and yet we're tolerating exclusion based on disability." Linda responded coldly, "I didn't exclude anyone. I just did what's best for the neighborhood. If they don't like it, they can go somewhere else." The room buzzed with murmurs. Some began looking at Linda differently, not as a model citizen anymore, but as a symbol of stubborn prejudice. Her husband, Walter Monroe, remained indifferent. As the director of technology at Innovatech, he was used to analyzing data, not emotional debates. As long as his wife wasn't breaking the law, he saw no issue. "They're just being overly sensitive," he said one evening at dinner, cutting into a steak with calm precision. Linda agreed. "These days, everyone thinks they're entitled to everything." At that very moment, in a modest home in the next neighborhood, Mrs. Alma Franklin, who had lived through 2 wars and 4 presidents, was serving dinner to Daniel and Sophie. She laid out bowls of homemade tomato soup and slices of toasted bread. "You know," she said as she sat down, "once my husband, Mr. Franklin, was mocked by neighbors because he was just a welder. But he was the kindest man I ever knew. He taught me never to judge anyone by their appearance." Daniel smiled faintly, his heart warmed. Sophie giggled when Mrs. Alma told the story of Mr. Franklin dropping the entire wedding cake at their reception. No one could have guessed that the young couple sitting in that cozy little kitchen, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and basil, would soon challenge an entire neighborhood, and even a city, to rethink what it means to be human. Daniel thought quietly to himself, "We don't need pity. We just need one chance to prove we deserve to live like anyone else." And that chance, unexpected and powerful, was coming very soon. It was Saturday, and downtown Springfield was more bustling than usual. Golden lights adorned every corner of the Carlton Hotel's grand ballroom, where the welcome gala for the new CEO of Innovatech's Midwest division was taking place. Linda Monroe wore a deep violet velvet dress, her makeup carefully applied. She accompanied her husband, Walter, who looked sharp in a custom-tailored tuxedo. Linda beamed with pride. "My husband is the director of technology, soon to be promoted to VP if all goes well," she often told friends. Ever since the rental rejection incident, Linda had grown more self-righteous, convinced that she had prevented a potential disturbance by turning down the young couple. The whispers of dissent only fueled her belief that she had done the right thing. The ballroom was filled with guests. Directors, department heads, and investors sat around round tables draped in white cloth, wine glasses shimmering under the chandelier. A soft-string quartet played in the background. Linda glanced around and said proudly to her husband, "It's such an honor to be here tonight. I heard the new CEO is very young and exceptionally visionary. Hopefully, you'll get to collaborate closely with him." Walter took a sip of his wine and replied casually, "I only interviewed him via Zoom. The video wasn't very clear, so I didn't get a good look at his face. But his resume is impressive, very strong in tech, with executive experience from a young age." Linda scoffed. Probably one of those prodigies sent to Harvard or Yale before they hit puberty. At that moment, the voice of the MC echoed across the room. A well-dressed man took the stage, his tone firm and enthusiastic. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. It is my honor to introduce the new Chief Executive Officer of Innovatech Midwest, Mr. Daniel Hayes." The ballroom erupted in applause. Linda smiled until she saw the man walking up to the stage. Daniel Hayes, in a sleek black suit, navy tie, and polished dress shoes, he walked with confidence. His face was unmistakable. He was the young man with Down syndrome whom Linda had rejected and dismissed just weeks ago, calling him a problem for the neighborhood. Linda felt her heart stop. She froze in place, her hands trembling, eyes wide as Daniel took the stage, shaking hands with top executives before turning toward the crowd under the spotlight. The entire room fell silent as Daniel took the microphone. He smiled, and his deep, calm voice rang out. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I have Down syndrome, but that has never stopped me from becoming the person I want to be." A breathless hush swept across the ballroom. "As a child, I was underestimated. I wasn't placed in regular classes. I wasn't picked for the team. I wasn't trusted. But thanks to those who believed in me, my mother, my teachers, and later my partner, I learned to believe in myself." Daniel paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience, and briefly landing on Linda, who tried desperately to avoid eye contact. "Today, I stand before you not just as the CEO of Innovatech," he continued, "but as living proof that every person has worth, no matter who they are, no matter where they start." Applause thundered through the room. Some guests stood and clapped. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Walter Monroe stared in disbelief at the stage. His expression darkened as he connected the dots. Daniel was the same man Linda had rejected, and he himself had interviewed Daniel via a blurry screen, failing to recognize him. Linda stared at her lap, feeling the weight of the room's gaze upon her. Nearby guests whispered. A woman behind her asked out loud, "Wasn't he the guy who got denied housing in Maple Avenue?" A young executive shook his head. The woman who turned him away should be ashamed. Linda's face burned. She swallowed hard, unable to respond. No one had named her directly, but she knew they were talking about her. As Daniel stepped down from the stage and made his way through the crowd, he stopped briefly at Walter and Linda's table. For a moment, Linda held her breath, but Daniel merely nodded politely and said, "Thank you for being here tonight." Linda didn't dare look up. What seemed like a closed chapter was now opening a new one. Daniel's speech quickly went viral on social media, and elsewhere on the internet, a video resurfaced, one taken by Sophie, who had silently recorded Linda's harsh rejection outside the rental house. That video spread like wildfire. Furious comments followed. "Thank God Daniel didn't give up because of people like her." This proves disability does not equal inability. Linda Monroe should be ashamed of judging people so cruelly. Linda became the target of public outrage. Several tenants moved out of her rental property, saying they didn't want to live with someone so discriminatory. Civil rights organizations spoke out. A local TV station invited Daniel and Sophie to speak on a special program about inclusion and equality. But Daniel didn't retaliate. He didn't insult Linda. He declined interviews that focused on negativity. He simply said, "I don't want this story to be about pain, but about a lesson. Not just for me, for all of us." The next morning, Walter Monroe sat motionless in his study chair, cradling a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. On his laptop screen played Daniel Hayes' speech, the same one that had gone viral overnight, shared over 200,000 times with thousands of supportive comments from across the country. His eyes lingered on the bold headline. Daniel Hayes, CEO with Down syndrome, inspires an entire nation. He sighed, furrowing his brows. Throughout his career, Walter had believed in ability, logic, and measurable qualifications. Resumes, KPIs, degrees. But now, he realized he had missed something essential. Not in performance metrics, but in the way he viewed people. Meanwhile, in the living room, Linda was on the phone with her neighbor Janice, trying to sound unaffected. Media these days blow everything out of proportion. "I don't think I did anything wrong. I was just doing what's right for the neighborhood." But Janice interrupted her for the first time, her tone firm. "Linda, I think you should reflect. He's not just a CEO. He's a kind person, and you treated him cruelly." Linda froze. Never before had her closest friend openly disagreed with her. After hanging up, she opened her social media and found herself being mocked. One viral meme showed her picture with the caption, "Ever look down on someone? They might be your husband's boss someday." At Innovatech, tension filled the air. Some employees, realizing that the new CEO was the man Linda had rejected, began whispering. One even joked with Walter in the elevator. "Hey, your wife's trending online. She aiming for a job in PR?" Walter tried to maintain composure, but a storm brewed inside him. His professional reputation, built on integrity and technical excellence, was now being tainted by his wife's careless actions. During an executive meeting, Daniel appeared calm and composed. He led the discussion with clarity, presenting innovative strategies that captured everyone's attention with his sharp thinking and collaborative spirit. After the meeting, Daniel asked Walter to stay behind. "Mr. Monroe," he said gently, "I'm aware of what happened with your wife. I don't want it to affect our work." Walter nodded, visibly unsettled. Thank you for your generosity." Daniel looked him in the eye. "I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing this because I believe if we want to change how the world sees others, we have to start with ourselves." Walter said nothing, but his heart felt heavy. One weekend afternoon, Linda went shopping alone. As she entered the grocery store, she spotted Daniel and Sophie standing in line, each holding a few groceries and a small bouquet of flowers. She froze, unsure whether to approach or walk away. But her legs moved on their own, and she found herself standing near them, hesitantly. Daniel turned. Sophie looked at her too, no anger in her eyes, only silence. I didn't know," Linda stammered, her voice trembling. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then smiled, not mockingly but sadly. "The real tragedy isn't that you didn't know who I was," he replied. "It's that you thought someone like me didn't deserve to be anyone at all." Linda stood frozen. His words cut deep into the pride she had clung to for so long. In that moment, all the masks she wore, the model landlord, the dignified wife, the respectable citizen, fell away, leaving a woman facing the bitter truth of who she had become. She bowed her head, tears welling in her eyes, and quietly walked away. Days later, Daniel and Sophie were invited to appear on the talk show Voice of Equality. They sat on a simple stage, hand in hand, sharing their story. "We don't need pity," Daniel said clearly, his eyes unwavering. "We just want to be seen as real human beings." The audience erupted in applause. A middle-aged woman stood up, tears streaming down her face. "My son has Down syndrome. Thank you. Thank you for giving me hope that he can become someone too. That day, millions of viewers cried. And in a quiet corner of Maple Avenue, Linda Monroe sat silently in front of the TV, watching Daniel's gentle smile, Sophie's hand tightly holding his, and she knew she had been wrong. Not because she refused to rent her apartment, but because she never saw them as people. After the Voice of Equality episode aired, the name Daniel Hayes became a new symbol of resilience and the fight for equality in modern American society. Schools began hosting talks about inclusion. Organizations supporting people with disabilities saw a surge in donations, and the hashtag Respect All Lives spread widely across social media. But amidst this wave of change, one person was still struggling in silence: Linda Monroe. On a quiet Wednesday morning, Linda stepped into the small church at the corner of the street, a place she rarely visited except on major holidays. Today, no one had asked her to come. She just needed a quiet space to think, to reflect on who she truly was after all her layers of pride had come crashing down. She sat on the last pew, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the crucifix hanging on the wall. Inside her, there was no more anger, no more excuses, only an empty silence where a question echoed. Why have I always feared those who are different from me? She remembered Daniel's eyes, not hateful, not accusing, just deeply understanding. She remembered his words. The real tragedy isn't that you didn't know who I was. It's that you thought someone like me didn't deserve to be anyone at all. For the first time in her life, Linda Monroe no longer wanted to be proper, model, or respectable. She simply wanted to be kind. That evening, Daniel and Sophie returned to their apartment. Not the cramped temporary room they once had, but a new place. Innovatech had offered to help them find a proper home, safe, comfortable, and legally secure. But Daniel declined the offer to purchase property. We just want to rent like everyone else. No special treatment. Eventually, an independent landlord, Ms. Gloria, an elderly black woman and former nurse, offered them a ground-floor apartment in her home. All I ask is that you live kindly, she said. Daniel and Sophie treasured that. Every morning, Sophie watered the flowers out front. Daniel walked their dog. They became a familiar, welcome presence in the neighborhood, without having to prove anything. One day, while shopping at the grocery store, Daniel unexpectedly saw Linda again. This time, there was no avoidance in her eyes. Linda walked up, her voice raspy but sincere. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know some mistakes can't be erased by an apology. Daniel looked at her, waiting. But I want to thank you. Because of you, I realize kindness isn't about the rules I used to follow. It's about how we choose to see the value in others. Daniel paused, then nodded. Thank you for coming. Sometimes, the greatest lesson comes from the silence of the one who was hurt. Linda smiled faintly, her eyes brimming with tears. She was no longer the proud woman she once was. Her hair had grown grayer, but her gaze had softened, like someone who had just learned how to be human again. A few weeks later, Daniel and Sophie appeared at a large inclusion conference in Chicago. They sat alongside educators, social workers, and hundreds of students from across the country. A 10th grade student raised their hand. Have you ever wanted to get revenge on the people who treated you badly? Daniel looked at the student and replied gently, Yes. When I was younger, I thought if I became rich, I'd make those people kneel and apologize. But I've learned, revenge never heals anything. He turned to Sophie, who was holding his hand tightly. We're not fighting to win. We just want to be seen for who we really are, like anyone else. Applause broke out. In the crowd, some people wept. The lesson Daniel offered didn't come from a textbook. It wasn't lofty philosophy. It came from his life, and anyone willing to listen could learn something from it. The next day, a major newspaper ran a feature titled, The Nameless Lesson from an Unlikely CEO. Daniel Hayes doesn't preach. He doesn't demand. He simply lives with kindness, and that alone is enough to make society reflect. Linda Monroe read the article in silence. She no longer felt offended that her name wasn't mentioned. On the contrary, she felt grateful, because some of the most valuable lessons come from silence itself. Then one afternoon, she began writing a letter, not to send to anyone, but to place at the altar of her late husband, who had passed away from stroke just a few weeks prior. Walter, I was wrong. But thanks to Daniel, I'm learning to start again. Not to erase the past, but to let my future be different. Kinda, more human. 1 year after the conference in Chicago, Daniel and Sophie had entered a new chapter in their lives. Not glamorous, not dramatic, but beautifully ordinary and full of meaning. Daniel remained CEO of Innovatech Midwest, but he reduced his time in the office to focus on a more important mission. The Harmony Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping people with disabilities integrate into society and access quality education. Sophie co-founded the organization and managed art therapy and vocational programs. They lived in a small sunlit house in the suburbs, not far from where Ms. Gloria had once rented them a room. The house had a little garden, a wooden swing, and 2 rescue dogs adopted from a local shelter. Every morning, Daniel walked the dogs while Sophie watered the plants and arranged paintings for the upcoming Art Without Barriers exhibition hosted by the foundation. Each painting was created by a person with a disability, each telling a story through color and emotion. That afternoon, they received a handwritten letter. It was from Linda Monroe. Dear Daniel and Sophie, I don't expect a reply, only that you read these words. After everything that has happened, I understand that an apology cannot undo pain. But I want to tell you, I sold the rental property. I used the money to start a small scholarship fund for students in special education, named after my late husband. I've also begun volunteering at the local disability support center. Just yesterday, I helped a boy with Down syndrome learn to read. When he finished the sentence, I believe in me, I cried. Perhaps I will never truly redeem my mistakes, but I'm choosing to live rightly now. Thank you for the greatest lesson I have ever received. Linda. Daniel put the letter down and sat in silence for a long while. Sophie poured tea and sat beside him. What do you think? Daniel didn't respond right away. He simply smiled, a soft, thoughtful smile, and nodded. I think real change doesn't come from stages or social media. It comes when someone dares to face themselves and step out of the shadow of their past. The following month, during the Harmony Foundation's art exhibition, Sophie guided a group of children with disabilities around the gallery. The kids squealed with joy as they saw their artwork proudly framed and displayed. Each one introduced the visitors as a true artist. Daniel stood beside a piece bursting with random swaths of color, an abstract image filled with energy. The artist was Eli, a young boy with Down syndrome who had once been rejected by 2 elementary schools. Now, he was the youngest representative of the Regional Inclusion Art Project. An older guest approached. It was Linda. She wore a beige cardigan, no heavy makeup, but her eyes were bright and steady. Daniel caught her gaze, and this time, he was the one to step forward. Hello, Mrs. Linda, he said. Linda smiled. I'm only here to stand quietly and observe. No speeches, no apologies. Just gratitude. Sophie approached and offered her a cup of warm tea. The 3 of them sat together on the exhibition porch, beneath the soft golden sunlight and the laughter of children. No more words were needed, because some wounds heal best in silence. The story closes with a short feature in a human interest magazine. Asterisk, as long as society continues to measure worth by performance, appearance, or IQ, there will always be those left behind. But if we learn to look deeper into hearts, resilience, and kindness, everything changes. Daniel and Sophie didn't change the world with revolutions. They changed it by simply living kindly. And sometimes that is the greatest miracle of all. Asterisk,